Hello, I'm Joseph Dillard, and welcome to the Integral Deep Listening video curriculum. Today I'd like to talk to you about the problem-solving concept of triangulation. Do you remember how, before the internet, we thought that our problem was ignorance, and that if we just had access to enough information, we would solve our problems? Well, that's not it. Most problem solving involves consulting external and collective sources of knowledge like Google, science, expertise, friends, colleagues, bosses, teachers, coaches, therapists, and gurus. That's mostly how we learn. We combine that information with what we already know and come up with a solution. A solution to our problem, which we test by trial and error or with empiricism. This works in many, probably most cases, particularly if the problem is simple and objective, like getting directions, learning to use a new computer app, or putting together a toy or a piece of equipment. It even works in relationships. We can go to couples counseling, get information and feedback from a therapist, combine that with what we already know, and dig ourselves out of conflicts. In most problem-solving situations, relying on expert others, information on the internet, and then on our own judgment, that's enough. So, for most cases, if it's not broke, don't fix it. That applies here, meaning you don't need to use triangulation in such situations. However, when it comes to discovering and following your life priorities, when it comes to seeing your own subjective enmeshment in life-destroying drama, these traditional approaches to problem solving come up short. This is because external sources of knowledge, regardless of how informed, brilliant, selfless, and thorough they may be, aren't you. They don't know you. They don't know the unique circumstances of your life. So the best they can do is say, in most cases, this is the approach that has been found to work most of the time for most people. In addition, the recommendations of others come with an agenda. Recognized or not, the viewpoint or worldview behind any recommendation is inclined towards some particular bias, prejudice, set of assumptions, or interpretation. That's fine. It's to be expected. It's normal, particularly as long as those biases are surfaced and disclosed. But how often is that the case? How often have we trusted a family member, friend, boss, politician, or spiritual leader only to end up feeling misled or manipulated? How often do we speak without awareness of how we may be slanting information to get others to agree with us? It's wise to assume that we are doing this outside of our awareness most of the time, unless there is recognition and sharing of our possible underlying motivations. It's rare that people take the time and go to the trouble of surfacing their motivations and personal investment in this or that solution. The world is full of very smart people with the wealth, power, and status to get anything they want and all the help they want. And they are still stuck and remain unhappy, unfulfilled, without a core meaning to their lives. What's that about? How's that? We have politicians that are powerless, billionaires that throw their vast resources into ephemeral endeavors. We have experts who are incredibly unbalanced people. Clearly, having access to vast external sources of knowledge and a wealth of personal experience do not necessarily add up to balance, happiness, or respect for the basic needs of humanity and the earth. Clearly, Trusting in our own intuition, knowingness, or conscience cannot be counted on to provide the objectivity we need to see how and where we are stuck, to see how we are our own worst enemies. The world is full of people struggling to keep their head above water, busy attempting to provide physical and economic security to themselves and their families. They are preoccupied with these foundational relational exchanges and needs. Their problem solving is limited and conditioned by their familial, cultural, and social scripting, by the zeitgeist of the civilization and era into which they and we have been born. We need a third element to our problem solving. What is missing? In addition to consulting objective sources, experts, others, and our own intuition, we need to learn how to access the perspectives of subjective sources of objectivity. We need subjective sources like dreams and imagery because these are aspects of ourselves on a very deep and intimate level. Consequently, these perspectives reflect our unique problems and circumstances better than external objective sources of objectivity, like experts in Google. That's because they are subjective. They are parts of us. However, they are also sources of objectivity because to their knowledge of who we are and how we stay stuck, they add their own perspective or worldview, which is, relatively speaking, objective in relation to our own best assessment of how to solve our problem. Regardless of who we are, those perspectives are relatively objective in relation to our own. This is because they are not dependent on physical survival or social status, since they have neither physical bodies nor a permanent identity. They are like vaporware, real but ephemeral, impermanent, imaginary, and free of almost all of the conditions that define both rationality and reality. This gives their perspectives a detachment and objectivity that is not normally found either in our own waking judgment, which is conditioned by all these factors, or by the input of experts, all of which are conditioned by their own known and unrecognized conditioning elements. This is not to claim that the perspectives of interviewed emerging potentials are unconditioned, but only that they are relatively so when compared to the perspectives of both objective others and our own scripting, worldviews, needs, and beliefs. Adding this third approach to problem solving is not important for trivial problems like deciding what's for lunch or managing our time. But it's critically important if we desire intimacy, honesty, and a life within the Socratic triad of truth, goodness, and beauty or harmony. It matters for solving the basic existential questions that are most important when we are in despair, really want to help others, or are on our deathbeds. If we really want to make a difference in our lives, we need to get in touch with the priorities of our interviewed emerging potentials, because these point toward the core priorities of our own unique life compass. Accessing the perspectives of subjective sources of objectivity does this. That's why I developed and teach integral deep listening, because most fundamentally, it provides a more powerful approach to solving the problems that matter most to our personal and interpersonal happiness. One might legitimately ask, why do I need to address issues that are so abstract, broad, and general? I need help dealing with my misbehaving child, or finding a job that pays better, or in solving some practical problem at work. The reason input from subjective sources of objectivity is important is not only that they can provide creative framings for such problems, but they can reframe our entire lives so that problems that consume our time, energy, and peace of mind vanish, or at least become less significant and important. They become less important or relevant to why we are who we are and how we want to live our lives. Some problems that seem intractable then get solved by becoming irrelevant. When we are no longer personally invested in priorities that please others or satisfy addictions, a lot of our problems go away on their own. This may sound mysterious or magical, particularly when we are so deeply invested in this or that problem. However, I've had it happen in my life, and I've seen it happen in the lives of many others. So this is a possible outcome to consider for yourself. One young man, who we shall call Fred, had dyslexia. He was so afraid of failure that he stayed home from school so that he wouldn't be exposed to certain humiliation and failure. Through IDL interviewing, he got in touch with a personification of his fear, a brain-sucking tick. This tick was very clever at hiding in the folds of his brain and avoiding being discovered. However, a very sharp-eyed, confident eagle showed up that was quite pleased to sit on Fred's shoulder at school and grab and eat the tick whenever it showed up in Fred's life as fear. Fred also had an owl who also didn't mind eating ticks and that did night duty, since he could see the tick sneaking around in Fred's dreams. However, both the eagle and owl thought the tick fairly disgusting, so Fred made sure they received regular offerings of mice and rabbits. Fred had gotten plenty of advice from parents, teachers, and counselors about his fear and what he needed to do about catching up with his schoolwork. But he was paralyzed by his fear. His anxiety also overwhelmed his own common sense. 2 legs of the 3-legged stool of triangulation had been effectively neutralized by the tick that was living rent-free in the cozy condo of Fred's brain. With his new bird friends, Fred was able to go back to school. He slowly integrated into his waking identity the focus and confidence of his eagle and his owl, who were, after all, his own emerging potentials. As Fred grew more focused and confident, his fear no longer overwhelmed his common sense. His problems didn't vanish. He was still scared. He still had to use his common sense to set goals and stick to them, but he now had help and inner resources that he lacked before. His fears of failure no longer kept him from taking the advice of those he respected. He was able to start using all 3 parts of the triangulation process. If Fred can do it, you can too. You don't have to let your own version of Fred's tick tap dance on your brain. IDL interviewing unearths, surfaces, and discloses underlying motivations, priorities, and agendas that we are not aware of, both in ourselves and in those we interview. The result is greater honesty and intimacy, combined with a reduction of manipulation and drama. Creative alternative solutions to our problems are often proposed. It is not unusual for us to already be aware of the proposed solution. What changes are our priorities? We give ignored or minimized but reasonable and feasible solutions more credibility than we did before. Ideal interviews demonstrate triangulation in the following way. When you state your life issues at the beginning of any ideal interview, you are saying, these are the problems that I want to address and hopefully solve. Creative alternative solutions to our problems are often proposed. It is not unusual for us to already be aware of the proposed solution. The perspectives that you access with integral deep listening aren't God's. They're meant to supplement objective and external sources of objectivity, like others and the internet, combined with your own common sense. When you have the benefit of all 3 of these sources of problem solving, you have a much closer read on an authentic solution that fits with who you are, your aptitudes, and where your life is headed. This allows you to live a more integrated and authentic life, and that translates into living a more helpful life, where your precious few years on planet Earth can make a genuine and positive difference. As Roy Disney said, it's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are. Do you have questions or comments? Let us know how we can help by sharing your interests in the section below this video or at Friends of IDL on Facebook. Thanks for watching. See you next time.